Sarah Connor held her children's hands tightly as she climbed the worn steps of the lakeside town hall. The pale January sun cast long shadows across the snow-dusted street, offering little warmth against the biting Colorado winter. Michael's 8-year-old fingers squeezed back with quiet reassurance, while Emma, just 6, skipped beside them, blissfully unaware of the desperation that had driven them here. 3 days. The eviction notice had given them just 3 days to leave the rental house they'd called home since John's death 18 months ago. The cancer had taken everything, her husband, their savings, and now their security. The heavy oak door creaked open to reveal a lobby frozen in time. Wood-paneled walls lined with faded photographs of stern-faced town officials from decades past. A dusty American flag hung limply in the corner. The place smelled of old paper and floor polish, the aroma of small-town bureaucracy. An elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses and thinning gray hair looked up from behind a cluttered desk, his weathered face softening at the sight of the children. Sarah's voice trembled as she approached his desk. "Mr. Thompson, I need anything that fits my budget." She opened her worn leather wallet, revealing the last $200 she'd managed to save from her substitute teaching job. The money meant for next week's groceries, now their only hope for shelter. The man studied her face for a moment, recognition dawning in his pale blue eyes. "You're John Connor's widow, aren't you? Such a shame. Good man, your husband." He shuffled through a stack of yellowed folders, finally pulling one from the bottom of the pile. His fingers lingered on the cover as if hesitating. "Mrs. Connor, there's a property here, but I'm not sure if you'll want it. At this point, anything with a roof would do." Sarah's shoulders straightened with quiet dignity, her voice steady despite the churning anxiety in her stomach. "Anything will do, Mr. Thompson. We can't be picky anymore. It's an old mansion in the rural area, about 15 miles from town center. The previous owner passed away 2 years ago and left very specific instructions." The man adjusted his glasses, squinting at the paperwork. "It's for sale for just $100. Sarah blinked, certain she'd misheard. $100? That can't be right. No property, not even a dilapidated shack, could possibly sell for such a pittance in this town, where even the most modest homes started at $250,000. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Daniel Sullivan, who owned the local bank, set this condition in his will, said he wanted it sold for that amount to a family that truly needed it." The clerk's eyes flicked up to meet hers, something unspoken passing between them. The name Daniel Sullivan hung in the air like a half-remembered melody, familiar yet impossible to place. But why hasn't anyone bought it yet? Sarah glanced down at her children. Michael was tracing the wood grain patterns on the desk while Emma swung their joined hands back and forth, humming softly to herself. The clerk hesitated, nervously shuffling the papers. His voice dropped to just above a whisper. "Well, Mrs. Connor, the townspeople have their superstitions. They say the house holds bad memories." Mr. Sullivan was a complicated man. Rich but lonely, never married, never had any known children. He cleared his throat. "Bad memories. Just small-town nonsense, ma'am. The important thing is it has 4 bedrooms, a library, a living room larger than this entire office. It just needs some cleaning and a few repairs." Michael looked up, suddenly interested, his eyes bright with childish excitement. "Mom, can we see the house?" He'd been so withdrawn since John died, rarely showing enthusiasm for anything. This spark of interest felt like a gift Sarah couldn't ignore. "Of course, my love." She turned back to Mr. Thompson. "Can we visit today?" The clerk handed her a large iron key, its weight substantial in her palm. "I can give you the keys right now if you'd like, but I should warn you, the road is rough because of the frost, and the power's been cut off for a long time. But the property itself," the clerk paused, a strange expression crossing his face. "It's quite something to behold." Sarah signed the papers with trembling hands, unable to believe their luck. A home for $100. There had to be a catch beyond local superstitions, but right now a roof over her children's heads was all that mattered. The address indicated a property 15 kilometers from the town center, on a road that wound through pine trees and abandoned fields. They'd have to take the bus as far as it went and walk the rest. Emma pointed excitedly as they left the town hall. "Mom, look, it's snowing!" Rare January flurries danced in the air, the first snowfall of the season. Sarah pulled her daughter's knit hat down more securely, a faint memory stirring. Herself as a child, reaching out to catch snowflakes on her tongue. But the memory felt hazy, as though viewed through frosted glass. Where had that been? Not here in Lakeside, where she'd moved with John just 5 years ago. They took the bus to the end of the line, the driver giving them a curious look as they disembarked at the rarely used stop. "You folks heading to the Sullivan place?" His weathered face creased with concern. "Night falls fast this time of year. Best hurry along." The dirt road stretched before them, flanked by towering pines heavy with snow. Each step took them further from civilization, the scattered houses giving way to empty lots and dense woods. Emma's initial excitement had faded, her small legs growing tired. "Is it far, Mommy?" Michael complained after 30 minutes of walking, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "It must be close now, son. Mr. Thompson said we'd see a sign at the entrance." Sarah shifted Emma to her hip, the child growing heavier with each step. She'd packed light, just essentials in her backpack. But even that weight was becoming burdensome as they trudged through the deepening snow. When they finally spotted the wrought iron gate, Sarah felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The sign read Sullivan Estate, in letters worn by time. The metal twisted into elegant scrollwork, despite the rust creeping along its edges. Beyond the gate, a tree-lined driveway stretched into the distance, bare branches forming a skeletal canopy overhead. The gate creaked open at her touch, as though it had been waiting for them. The driveway seemed to stretch endlessly, each bend promising the house would appear, yet leading only to another curve. Then suddenly they rounded a final corner, and there it stood. The mansion loomed against the darkening sky, 2 stories of imposing grandeur with white columns flanking the entrance and large windows that reflected the fading sunlight like vacant eyes. The structure was Victorian in design, with intricate gingerbread trim and a wraparound porch that must have been glorious in its heyday. Snow dusted the steep pitched roof and blanketed the abandoned gardens, softening the mansion's imposing silhouette. "Wow, Mom, it's a castle!" Emma clapped her mittened hands together, her earlier fatigue forgotten in the face of this fairy tale vision. "It is big." Michael agreed, but with less enthusiasm, his young eyes taking in the peeling paint and missing shingles with a pragmatism beyond his years. Sarah inserted the old key into the heavy lock, the mechanism groaning in protest. The door swung open with a cinematic creak, revealing an entry hall with soaring ceilings and a sweeping wooden staircase leading to the second floor. The air inside was cold, but not damp, surprisingly well preserved despite years of abandonment. What struck Sarah most was that the house wasn't empty. Furniture draped with white sheets spread throughout the rooms like silent ghosts frozen in time. A crystal chandelier hung from the ornate ceiling medallion, dusty but intact. Portraits in heavy frames lined the walls, their subjects obscured by years of accumulated grime. Why did the owner leave everything here? Michael pulled back one of the sheets, revealing a leather armchair of obvious quality. "I don't know, son. Maybe he left in a hurry, or perhaps he meant for it all to stay, for whoever came next." Sarah moved through the main room, discovering leather sofas, a dining table that could seat 12, and bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Everything seemed preserved in time, just covered by the dust of abandonment. In the kitchen, they found good quality utensils and a wood-burning stove that appeared well-maintained despite its age. Sarah opened drawers to find silverware and fine china, all left behind as if the owner had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. "Who leaves things like this behind?" she murmured to herself, running a finger along the marble countertop. "Mom, there's an envelope here on the table." Emma pointed to a yellowed envelope resting in the center of the dining table, as if it had been placed there deliberately, waiting to be found. Sarah picked up the envelope carefully, turning it over in her hands. It had no sender, just a name handwritten on the front in elegant script: Elizabeth Ann. Her heart raced. Elizabeth Ann was her maiden name, the name she hadn't used in over 10 years since she married John Connor. "How could someone know my maiden name?" she whispered, looking around as if expecting to see someone watching from the shadows. Her fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was an old black and white photograph. It showed a girl of about 4 years old playing in the garden of the very mansion where they now stood. The child wore a white dress with a lace collar, her hair in pigtails as she smiled at the camera. Sarah recognized the dress immediately, the same one she wore in her only childhood photo, the only memory she had from before going to the orphanage at age 5. "Mom, who is that girl?" Michael peered at the photo over her shoulder, his brow furrowed in concentration. I I think it's me." Sarah's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. "What do you mean, Mom? Did you live here?" Michael's eyes widened, looking around the mansion with renewed interest. "I don't know, son. I don't remember anything before age 5. Sarah turned the photo over and found a date written in the same elegant handwriting. Elizabeth, 4 years old, 1992, followed by a signature she couldn't decipher. The evening chill was intensifying as darkness fell, snow accumulating outside the windows in earnest now. Sarah decided they needed to focus on practical matters first, exploring the house to better understand their situation before night fully descended. "Mom, I'm cold." Emma's small voice broke the silence, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "Let's see if we can get the fireplace working." Sarah led them back to the main living room, where a massive stone hearth dominated one wall. Years of experience as a single mother had taught her practical skills: how to start fires, fix leaky faucets, handle basic home repairs. John had always admired her self-sufficiency, even as cancer had stolen his ability to help around the house. She found kindling and split logs stacked neatly beside the fireplace, another sign that the house had been prepared for new occupants. Soon warm flames licked at the dry wood, casting a golden glow across the sheet-covered furniture. Michael helped her remove the dusty coverings, revealing exquisite craftsmanship in every piece. With the living room warming up, Sarah continued her exploration. On the second floor, they found 4 bedrooms. The master bedroom still contained men's clothes in the closet, all large sizes in business cuts. On the dresser, a silver-backed hairbrush with gray strands still caught in the bristles. "It looks like the owner left yesterday," Michael commented, running his hand over the polished wood of a writing desk. The second bedroom was empty, but the third made Sarah freeze in the doorway. It was clearly a child's bedroom, preserved like a museum exhibit. A small bed with blue sheets, old toys arranged carefully on wooden shelves, and animal pictures adorning the walls. The room had been designed for a boy, with model airplanes hanging from the ceiling and a collection of toy soldiers standing at attention on a bookshelf. "Mom, look!" Emma ran to a dollhouse that occupied one corner of the room. It was an exact miniature replica of the Sullivan mansion, down to the smallest details. Even the windows were the same, tiny curtains visible through the glass panes. "How strange," Sarah murmured, examining the toys. They dated from the 1980s and 1990s, expensive for their time and meticulously maintained. Had Daniel Sullivan had children after all? Or was this room preserved as some kind of shrine? In the 4th bedroom, they discovered what appeared to be a home office. An antique desk dominated the space, its surface covered with papers. The walls were lined with framed diplomas and bank certificates, all bearing the name Daniel Sullivan. Sarah approached the desk and began examining the documents, her confusion growing with each discovery. They were bank statements, business correspondence, and photographs. Many photographs. Images of a girl growing up, first day of school, graduations, her wedding. All had notes on the back with dates and locations. They were all of her. Elizabeth, first day at St. Joseph's Orphanage, 1993. Elizabeth, high school graduation, 2006. Elizabeth, marriage to John Connor, P13. Sarah's hands trembled as she flipped through the images. Someone had documented her entire life, tracking her movements through the years without her knowledge. The invasion of privacy should have terrified her, but instead she felt an inexplicable sense of being watched over, protected from afar. "Mom, are you okay?" Michael touched her arm, his young face creased with worry. "Yes, son, I'm just surprised. I think we need to find out who this Daniel Sullivan was." Sarah continued exploring the office, discovering a locked drawer in the desk. After searching, they found a small key hidden in a hollow book on the bookshelf. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Inside the drawer was a thick file with the name Elizabeth Ann's sister written on the cover. Sister. The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. She sank into the office chair, trying to process the information. Could she have had a brother all this time? A brother she never knew existed? She opened the file with unsteady hands. The first page was her birth certificate, containing information she had never seen before. Father's name, Thomas Sullivan. Mother's name, Catherine Johnson Sullivan. Remarks. Brother Daniel Sullivan. Born 1985, Daniel had been 7 years older than her. The following pages told a story she had never known. Her parents had been wealthy landowners in the region, but they faced financial difficulties when she was very young. A small plane crash claimed both their lives when she was just 4 years old. Daniel, then 11, was sent to wealthy relatives in New York. She, being too young, went to St. Joseph's Orphanage because those same relatives didn't want the burden of raising 2 children. "Did he look for me?" she whispered, turning to a handwritten letter dated 2008. "Elizabeth, my dear sister, I've been trying to find you for years. I hired detectives, checked records, but you disappeared from the system when you left the orphanage at 18. I hope you're well, happy, and safe. One day I will find you and explain why I couldn't come for you sooner. Your loving brother, Daniel." There were dozens of similar letters, all unsent, written over 15 years. Daniel had been searching for her, wanting to reconnect, but seemingly unable to take that final step. The last letter was dated just 2 months before his death. "Elizabeth, I found out you got married and have children. I'm happy you found a family. I know where you live, but I don't have the courage to show up and turn your life upside down. You've built something beautiful without me, but I want to make sure you never go without. I'm arranging everything so that if you ever need it, you'll find your way here. This house is rightfully yours. It always has been. Forgive me for not being brave enough to introduce myself. Daniel." "Mommy, why are you crying?" Emma climbed onto her lap, small fingers wiping away tears Sarah hadn't realized were falling. "It's because I found out I had a brother, honey. A brother who looked after me even when I didn't know it." Sarah held her daughter close, overwhelmed by the discovery of a family connection she never knew existed. "Where is he now?" Emma asked, her innocent question bringing fresh pain. "He's gone, sweetheart. He died 2 years ago. But he left us this house. It belonged to our family." Sarah continued searching through the papers, finding medical documents that showed Daniel had battled a serious illness in his final years. The reports indicated he knew his time was limited, perhaps explaining his urgency in making arrangements for Sarah to find her way back to the family home. She also discovered bank statements that left her stunned. Daniel had been depositing money into an account in her name for years, but she had never known this account existed. "How is this possible?" she asked aloud, though no one could answer. A folder labeled "Plan for Elizabeth" contained a document detailing his arrangements. The sale of the house for a symbolic price, the town employee instructed on when to offer the property, the bank account for emergencies. Daniel had orchestrated every detail so she would find the house at precisely the moment she needed it most. The snow outside was falling heavily now, the windows frosted with delicate, crystalline patterns. As night descended fully, the old house creaked and settled around them. "We should get some rest," Sarah decided. "Tomorrow we can explore more." In the kitchen, they found a pantry still stocked with non-perishable food, canned goods, rice, pasta, everything within the expiration date, as if someone had restocked it recently. "Mom, there's even hot chocolate." Michael held up a canister with childish delight, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in months. While they prepared a simple dinner on the wood-burning stove, Sarah tried to organize her thoughts. Daniel had been the brother she never knew she had, yet he had watched over her from afar her entire life. The revelation was both comforting and unsettling. Why had he never approached her directly? What had stopped him from reuniting their fractured family? After dinner, they settled in the main room with blankets found in a cedar chest. The fireplace provided sufficient warmth, and soon Emma was fast asleep, curled against Sarah's side. Michael, however, remained awake, his curious mind processing everything they'd discovered. "Mom, tell me more about Uncle Daniel." The word uncle sounded strange coming from him, referring to a man none of them had ever met. "Well, from what I've learned today, he seems to have been a very special person. Even without knowing me well, he never forgot about me. He watched over us from a distance. Why didn't he come to visit you?" Michael's question echoed Sarah's own thoughts. From his letters, it seems Daniel was afraid of disrupting the life I'd built. She stroked her son's hair, thinking about the complex emotions that must have tormented her brother. Or perhaps he felt guilty that I went to the orphanage while he was raised by wealthy relatives. Sometimes, son, people think it's better to love from a distance than risk causing trouble. But I wish I could have met him, at least once. That night, Sarah slept in the master bedroom, using the clean sheets she found in the cedar-lined closet. The children stayed in the room with the paws, enchanted by the dollhouse and model airplanes. But sleep proved elusive for Sarah. Her mind kept returning to the letters and photographs, trying to piece together the story of her forgotten past and the brother who had loved her from afar. Around midnight, a sound startled her awake, a distinct creak from downstairs, different from the normal settling of an old house. Sarah sat up, her heart pounding. Had she imagined it? Then came another noise, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the wooden floor below. Sarah slipped out of bed, grateful she'd thought to keep a flashlight beside her. The hallway was dark, moonlight streaming through windows casting long shadows on the walls. She checked on the children first, both sound asleep, unaware of any disturbance. The stairs creaked beneath her weight as she descended, following the sounds to the kitchen. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing out of place. Had she imagined the noise? Then a sudden draft chilled her. A window was open, snow drifting in onto the floor. Sarah was certain she'd closed and locked every window before they went to bed. She approached cautiously, noticing muddy footprints on the floor beneath the window. Someone had been here, perhaps still was. Fear gripped her as she thought of her children sleeping upstairs. Sarah grabbed a heavy cast-iron pan from the stove, her only available weapon, and began a careful search of the first floor. The living room was empty, the fire now just glowing embers. The dining room, too, showed no signs of intrusion. But when she reached the office, Sarah froze. The desk drawers had been pulled open, papers strewn across the floor. Someone had been searching for something. A floorboard creaked behind her. Sarah whirled around, the pan raised defensively, only to face a darkly clothed figure wearing a ski mask. Before she could scream, the intruder lunged forward. Sarah's self-defense training, taken years ago at John's insistence, kicked in automatically. She swung the pan with all her might, connecting with the intruder's shoulder. The figure grunted in pain but didn't fall. Instead, gloved hands reached for her throat. Sarah ducked under the outstretched arms, using the intruder's momentum to push them off balance. The figure stumbled into the desk, sending more papers flying. Sarah didn't wait to see what would happen next. She ran, heart pounding, toward the front door. Behind her, heavy footsteps gave chase. She fumbled with the lock, finally wrenching the door open and bursting onto the snow-covered porch, her bare feet immediately numb by the cold. The night air burned her lungs as she screamed for help, though she knew no neighbors were close enough to hear. The intruder appeared in the doorway, hesitating at the threshold. For a moment they stared at each other, Sarah trembling with cold and fear, the masked figure silhouetted against the dim light from inside. Then a new sound cut through the night, an engine roaring to life. Headlights swept across the property as a truck barreled up the driveway, high beams blazing. The intruder turned and fled back into the house, presumably seeking another exit. The truck skidded to a stop and a large figure leaped out, moving with surprising agility for his size. "You all right, ma'am?" The deep voice belonged to an older man, his silhouette broad-shouldered and imposing. "There's someone in the house. My children are upstairs." Sarah's voice cracked with panic. Without hesitation, the stranger pulled a flashlight from his coat and rushed past her into the mansion. Sarah followed, maternal instinct overriding her fear. They found no sign of the intruder on the first floor, but a back door stood open, snow blowing in. Footprints led away from the house, disappearing into the woods that bordered the property. The children. Sarah bolted up the stairs, the stranger close behind. To her immense relief, both Michael and Emma remained asleep, undisturbed by the commotion below. The masked intruder hadn't made it to the second floor. Back downstairs, Sarah finally got a good look at her unexpected rescuer in the light of his powerful flashlight. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a weathered face and salt and pepper hair cut in a military style. His posture was ramrod straight despite his age, and a faded USMC tattoo was visible on his forearm where he'd pushed up his sleeve. "Name's Jack Thompson, ma'am. I live about 2 miles down the road." Noticed your lights earlier, figured someone had finally taken up residence at the Sullivan place. Been keeping an eye on it, promised Danny I would. His voice was gruff but kind, blue eyes sharp and assessing as they swept the room for any remaining threat. You knew my brother? Sarah's question came out as a whisper. Brother? Jack's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Well, I'll be damned. You must be Elizabeth. Danny talked about you all the time, showed me your pictures, said someday you might find your way back here. His face softened. You look like your mother. The confirmation that Daniel had indeed been her brother, from someone who had known him personally, made the connection feel suddenly, vividly real. Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Why are you here tonight? Jack knelt to examine the muddy footprints on the floor. Been patrolling the area since Danny passed. Too many folks interested in this place, and not for the right reasons. Heard your scream from my property. Good thing I was outside checking on my generator. Sarah noticed for the first time that Jack carried a sidearm holstered at his hip. The man moved with the careful precision of someone with military or law enforcement training. Who would break in here? What were they looking for? Jack's expression darkened. Danny made some powerful enemies in this town, people who thought they'd buried their secrets when he died. His gaze fell on the scattered papers. Looks like they were searching for something specific. Sarah remembered the file about her, the bank statements, Daniel's letters. There's so much I don't understand. I only just found out today that Daniel was my brother. Why didn't he ever contact me directly? Jack sighed heavily, years of loyalty to his friend evident in his troubled expression. That's a long story, and not all of it's mine to tell. But Danny was a good man, the best I've known. He did what he thought was right. Always. He rose, moving to secure the back door the intruder had used to escape. We should call the sheriff, report the break-in. Sarah nodded, though something in Jack's tone suggested he didn't have much faith in local law enforcement. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and cold. What would have happened if Jack hadn't arrived when he did? Would the intruder have harmed her children? The thought was unbearable. As if reading her mind, Jack spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Connor, this place might not be safe for you and your little ones. At least not tonight. I've got a spare room at my place. You're welcome to it until we sort this out. The offer was tempting, but Sarah looked around at the house, her house now, with its secrets and connections to a past she'd never known. No, this is our home now. We're not going to be chased away on our first night. The determination in her voice surprised even her. Jack studied her for a moment, then nodded with what might have been approval. Your call, but I'll stay the night. Keep watch. He patted his holstered weapon. Nobody's getting past me. While Jack secured the house, checking windows and doors with practiced efficiency, Sarah returned to the office to gather the scattered papers. Among them, she found a newspaper clipping she hadn't noticed earlier. The headline read, Local Banker Exposes Corruption, Faces Backlash. Daniel's photo accompanied the article, his expression serious but determined. The piece described how he had uncovered fraudulent practices at the bank he inherited, but provided few specifics. The article ended with a quote from Daniel. Some prices are worth paying for the truth. What price had her brother paid? And why were people still searching his home 2 years after his death? Sarah carefully organized the papers, placing them back in the desk drawer. Tomorrow she would read every document, study every photograph, until she understood exactly what had happened to the brother she never knew. Jack returned from his security check. All clear for now. That back door lock needs replacing. It's been tampered with before tonight. He settled into an armchair with a clear view of both the staircase and the front entrance, his posture relaxed but alert. Get some sleep, Mrs. Connor. We'll figure things out in the morning. Sarah hesitated at the foot of the stairs. I never thanked you properly for showing up when you did. Jack waved away her gratitude. Just keeping a promise to an old friend. Danny saved my life once, back in Desert Storm. We served together with your father. His voice softened at the mention of her father, a man Sarah had no memory of. Thomas Sullivan was a hell of a soldier. Would be proud to see his daughters got the same fighting spirit. Fighting spirit, the words echoed in Sarah's mind as she climbed the stairs to check on her children once more. Both still slept peacefully, unaware of the night's events. She gently kissed each forehead before returning to the master bedroom, Daniel's room. Lying in the darkness, Sarah could almost sense her brother's presence, as if the walls themselves held memories of the man who had lived and died here. What secrets had he taken to his grave? What dangers had followed him, and now, perhaps, threatened her family? One thing was certain: she wouldn't run. Not from this house with its connections to her forgotten past. Not from whatever had sent an intruder searching through Daniel's papers. Sarah had spent her entire life not knowing who she really was or where she came from. Now that she'd found a piece of her history, she wouldn't let it go without a fight. As dawn broke over the Sullivan estate, Sarah stood at the bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. The beauty of the scene contrasted sharply with the danger that had visited in the night. But in the morning light, her resolve only strengthened. This house, this Warren, it was her birthright, her children's legacy. Whatever secrets lay hidden within these walls, Sarah would uncover them all. And whatever threats came, she would face them head on. For herself, for Michael and Emma, and for the brother who had watched over her from afar, waiting for her to find her way home. Morning light spilled through the windows of the Lakeside Sheriff's Office, highlighting decades of coffee stains on the worn linoleum floor. Sheriff Wilson leaned back in his chair, skepticism etched into every line of his weathered face as Sarah finished describing the previous night's break-in. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, casting an unhealthy pallor over the small, cluttered room that smelled of stale coffee and dusty filing cabinets. "Mrs. Connor, no offense, but old houses make all kinds of noises." Wilson's pen tapped against his notepad where he'd written exactly 3 words: Sullivan House Disturbance. Probably just some local kids playing pranks. That place has been empty for years, bound to attract curiosity. Jack Thompson stood by the door, arms crossed over his broad chest, his military bearing a stark contrast to the sheriff's slouched posture. "There were footprints, Wilson. Someone broke in through the back door. We found the lock had been tampered with." His voice carried the weight of authority that came from decades of command. Wilson's expression hardened, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "I'll send Deputy Hayes out there later today to take a look. But between you and me, Mrs. Connor, you might want to reconsider your living situation. That house has a history, not all of it pleasant." Sarah straightened her spine, meeting the sheriff's gaze directly. "My brother's house is my home now, Sheriff. I'd appreciate if you'd take this seriously." She placed the muddy footprint photographs Jack had insisted on taking on the desk between them. "Whatever history that house has, it's my history too." The drive back to the Sullivan estate passed in tense silence. Fresh snow blanketed the landscape, erasing any evidence of the previous night's intruder from the exterior of the property. Jack's truck growled along the unplowed road, its chains biting into the packed snow beneath. "The sheriff isn't going to help." Sarah stared out at the passing pines, their branches heavy with white. The certainty in her voice wasn't a question. Jack's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles whitening. "Wilson and your brother had a complicated relationship. Danny caught him looking the other way too many times. His gaze remained fixed on the road ahead. You should know something, Mrs. Connor. This town isn't what it seems on the surface. There are people here with a vested interest in keeping the past buried." Back at the mansion, Sarah found Michael and Emma building a snowman in the front yard under Maria Rodriguez's watchful eye. The older woman had arrived at dawn, introducing herself as Daniel's housekeeper of 15 years. She'd brought fresh groceries, her weathered face lighting up at the sight of children in the house again. Inside, after making sure the children were settled with hot chocolate and cookies under Maria's care, Sarah returned to Daniel's office. The scattered papers from the previous night's intrusion had been carefully reorganized by Jack, who now stood guard by the window, his gaze sweeping the perimeter of the property with military precision. Sarah unlocked the desk drawer where she'd found the file about herself, searching for more information. Behind a row of folders, her fingers brushed against something solid, a leather-bound journal embossed with her brother's initials. The spine cracked as she opened it, revealing pages of handwritten notes in what appeared to be some kind of code. The letters and numbers made no sense at first glance, but certain patterns emerged as she flipped through the pages. Dates were clearly marked, along with what looked like initials. She brought the journal to Jack, who examined it with narrowed eyes. "It's a modified military cipher, One your father and I used during Desert Storm. Jack's finger traced the lines of text. Danny and I adapted it years ago when he first suspected something wasn't right at the bank. His expression darkened. He was worried about surveillance, even then. Can you read it? Sarah leaned closer, trying to decipher the cryptic markings that held her brother's thoughts. Jack nodded slowly. Most of it. It'll take time, though. The pages in your hands contain the beginning of your brother's investigation into Thomas Reynolds and his activities at the bank. Sarah spent the afternoon learning the cipher from Jack, her teacher's mind quickly grasping the patterns and rules. As the coded text transformed into readable information, a disturbing picture emerged. Daniel had documented a systematic fraud orchestrated by Thomas Reynolds, the current bank director who had been Daniel's employee before his death. Reynolds had been siphoning funds from customer accounts, manipulating records, and issuing fraudulent loans. My brother was investigating all states. So unless Sarah looked up from the journal, her eyes burning from hours of intense focus. Why didn't he go to the authorities? He did. Jack's voice carried a weight of disappointment. Sheriff Wilson buried the initial report. The state banking commission was headed by the mayor's brother-in-law. Danny was stonewalled at every turn. That evening, after putting the children to bed, in rooms now cleaned and made comfortable by Maria's efficient care, Sarah continued her exploration of the house. The mansion felt different now, less intimidating, more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Each room held potential clues to her brother's life and the mysterious circumstances surrounding his death. In the library, grand floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound classics and modern financial text. Sarah ran her fingers along the spines, noticing how some volumes showed more wear than others. One shelf contained books on banking regulations and financial crimes, their pages marked with sticky notes in Daniel's handwriting. She pulled out a particularly worn volume on banking law, and something clicked behind the bookcase. Sarah stepped back, watching in astonishment as a section of the bookshelf swung outward, revealing a hidden doorway. A narrow staircase descended into darkness beyond the secret entrance. Sarah's heart pounded as she retrieved her flashlight and stepped into the passage. The stairs led to a basement room that didn't appear on any of the house plans she'd found. Unlike the dusty, cobweb space she had expected, this hidden chamber was a fully equipped modern office. A computer workstation dominated one wall, surrounded by filing cabinets and evidence boards covered with photographs, documents, and maps connected by red string. This was Daniel's real workspace, the command center for his investigation. Sarah moved around the room in awe, taking in the extent of her brother's efforts. One board was dedicated entirely to Thomas Reynolds, tracking his activities, properties, and connections to local officials. Another contained information about bank customers who had lost money, with documentation showing how Daniel had quietly reimbursed them from his personal accounts. A small safe stood in the corner, its door ajar. Inside, Sarah found banking records showing massive transfers from Daniel's personal fortune to a series of accounts belonging to people she didn't recognize. Attached notes explained each transfer: compensation for losses suffered due to Reynolds' fraud, money that Daniel had paid from his own pocket to protect the bank's customers without exposing the corruption publicly. By the time he died, Daniel had depleted almost his entire fortune. He'd kept only enough to maintain the mansion and set up the trust funds Sarah had discovered earlier. He had sacrificed everything to make things right for people who never even knew he was helping them. Sarah sank into the office chair, overwhelmed by the evidence of her brother's integrity and sacrifice. A small video camera sat on the desk, connected to the computer. The screen showed a paused video file labeled, "For Elizabeth, Final Thoughts." Her hand shook as she pressed play. Daniel's face filled the screen, a middle-aged man with familiar eyes that mirrored her own. His hair was thinning, his face gaunt from illness, but his gaze was clear and direct. The timestamp showed the video had been recorded just 3 weeks before his death. "Elizabeth, if you're watching this, then my plan worked, and you found your way home." Daniel's voice was weaker than she had imagined, but carried a quiet dignity. "I've spent my life trying to find the right moment to re-enter yours, always convincing myself that next year would be better, that you were doing fine without the complication of a long-lost brother." His eyes filled with regret. It was cowardice disguised as consideration. The truth is, I was afraid you'd reject me, blame me for not fighting harder to keep us together when we were children. Sarah touched the screen, tracing the contours of her brother's face as tears blurred her vision. Daniel continued, explaining how he had followed her life from afar, proud of the woman she'd become, the family she'd built. When John got sick, I wanted to reach out then. Daniel's expression tightened with remembered pain. But I was fighting my own battle by that point. The cancer took him anyway, despite the treatments I arranged. I'm sorry I couldn't save him for you, Elizabeth. I'm sorry for so many things. The video ended with Daniel promising that everything he had left was hers, along with a warning: be careful who you trust in Lakeside. The corruption runs deeper than you can imagine. Sarah sat in the silence that followed, processing everything she'd learned. Her brother had been a hero, not the villain the town believed him to be. He'd sacrificed his reputation, his fortune, and perhaps even his life to protect people who never knew what he'd done for them. The sound of footsteps on the stairs startled her from her thoughts. Jack appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from concern to amazement as he took in the hidden office. You found it. His voice held a note of respect. Danny told me about this place, but I'd never seen it. Said it was where he kept the evidence that could bring down half the town's leadership if it ever came to light. Sarah gestured to the evidence boards, the financial records, the video still frozen on her brother's face. He paid them back, Jack. All the people who lost money because of Reynolds. Daniel used his own fortune to make them whole. That's who Danny was. Jack moved further into the room, examining the evidence boards with a professional eye. Always fighting other people's battles, even when it cost him everything. The next morning, Sarah enrolled Michael and Emma in the local elementary school. The principal's office featured wood-paneled walls adorned with decades of class photos and sports trophies. Principal Matthews, a thin woman with a perpetual pinched expression, reviewed the children's records with barely concealed suspicion. Connor? Not Sullivan? She peered over her reading glasses at Sarah. I understood you were claiming to be Daniel Sullivan's sister. I am. I took my husband's name when we married. Sarah maintained her composure despite the woman's obvious skepticism. The children have been registered as Connor since birth. Matthew's pen tapped against the enrollment forms. We have limited resources for special accommodations, Mrs. Connor. Any learning disabilities or behavioral issues should be disclosed up front. My children are well-behaved and academically advanced for their ages. Sarah's voice cooled several degrees. Michael has shown particular aptitude for mathematics and science. Emma is already reading at a third-grade level. The principal's thin lips pressed together. Very well. Classes begin at 8 sharp. Tardiness is not tolerated. Her gaze flicked briefly to the window where the Sullivan mansion could be seen in the distance. Like many others in town, there seemed to be a story behind her evident dislike of the Sullivan name. As Sarah left the school office, she noticed how conversations hushed when she passed by, felt the weight of curious and often hostile stares. Word had spread quickly about her connection to Daniel. By the time she reached her car, whispers followed in her wake. Sullivan's sister bought that cursed house, stirring up trouble again. The hardware store presented the next challenge. Sarah needed supplies to repair the back door lock and start renovations on the mansion's more neglected areas. Bell's Hardware occupied a prime spot on Main Street, its windows displaying power tools and seasonal decorations. The bell above the door announced her arrival, causing several customers to turn and stare. The owner, a burly man in his 60s with calloused hands and suspicious eyes, approached with obvious reluctance. Can I help you? His tone suggested he'd prefer not to. I need a replacement deadbolt for an antique door, some wood filler, and paint supplies. Sarah met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated by the now familiar hostility. The man, Bill Bell according to his name tag, crossed his arms. We don't deliver out to the Sullivan place. Not since Daniel accused my cousin of overcharging on supplies. Cost Freddie his contracting business when word got around. I have my own truck. Sarah's voice remained level despite her rising frustration. And I wasn't aware of any history between you and my brother. I'm just looking to make some repairs to my home. Your home? Bell's laugh held no humor. That house has been nothing but trouble for this town. Daniel Sullivan thought he was better than the rest of us, looking down from his mansion on the hill. Then he closed the bank, cost 50 people their jobs. Families had to move away. Businesses closed. His eyes narrowed. Now you show up out of nowhere claiming to be his sister. Mighty convenient timing, if you ask me. Sarah abandoned her planned purchases, recognizing a battle she couldn't win today. As she turned to leave, she came face to face with an elegantly dressed woman in her late 50s, silver-streaked dark hair, framing a face that still held considerable beauty. The hatred in this town has always been fueled by ignorance. The woman's voice carried across the suddenly silent store. Perhaps if people knew the truth about Daniel Sullivan, they'd direct their anger where it belongs. She turned to Sarah, extending a manicured hand. Catherine Walker, I was a friend of your brother's. Perhaps we could talk somewhere more civilized. They settled at a small cafe 3 blocks from the hardware store. The coffee cup was nearly empty at mid-morning, allowing them relative privacy in a corner booth. Catherine ordered for both of them with the confidence of a regular customer, then fixed Sarah with an appraising look. You have his eyes. The observation came with a hint of melancholy. Daniel spoke of you often, showed me your photographs. He was so proud of the woman you'd become, even from a distance. You were close to my brother? Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm mug the waitress placed before her, seeking both physical and emotional comfort. Catherine's smile held a universe of private memories. We were involved for almost 3 years, until his investigation made things too complicated. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. Too dangerous. The investigation into Thomas Reynolds? Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. I found Daniel's hidden office last night. The evidence he collected was only the tip of the iceberg. Catherine's expression hardened. Reynolds was merely a lieutenant in a much larger operation. The real power lies with Mayor Henderson and his circle of business associates. They've been embezzling from the town's development funds for decades, using the bank to launder the money. When Daniel inherited the bank from your father's estate and started reviewing the books, he stumbled onto their scheme. Sarah absorbed this information, pieces falling into place. So when Daniel reported the fraud, they made him the scapegoat. Catherine nodded grimly. Fabricated evidence suggesting Daniel himself was behind the missing funds. When the bank was shut down pending investigation, Reynolds made sure everyone blamed your brother. The convenient villain in his mansion on the hill, too rich to care about working people losing their jobs. After school, Sarah found Michael waiting alone outside the building, his shoulders hunched against the January wind. A fresh bruise darkened his cheekbone, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. Emma emerged a moment later, running to Sarah with a drawing clutched in her small hand, apparently oblivious to her brother's distress. What happened? Sarah knelt before her son, gently examining his face. Michael's gaze dropped to the ground, shame replacing pain in his expression. They said we don't belong here. His voice was barely audible. That Uncle Daniel stole their parents' money and made them move away. A bigger boy pushed me when I said he was lying. The drive home passed in grim silence, Michael staring out the window while Emma chattered about her new teacher. Sarah's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as she navigated the snowy roads, anger and helplessness battling within her. How could she protect her children from a town's worth of prejudice? Jack was waiting at the mansion, a toolbox at his feet and determination in his weathered face. They wouldn't sell you supplies? He took in Michael's bruised face with a sharp glance, correctly interpreting what had happened without needing explanation. Not exactly a warm welcome. Sarah ushered the children inside where Maria waited with hot chocolate and fresh-baked cookies. The housekeeper's dark eyes narrowed at Michael's injury, but she asked no questions, simply enfolding the boy in a gentle hug that brought the first smile to his face in school. Left alone with Jack on the porch, Sarah released the frustration she'd been containing all day. They've turned my brother into some kind of monster. How am I supposed to clear his name when no one will even speak to me? Jack placed a calloused hand on her shoulder, his touch conveying more understanding than words could. Sometimes the only way to change a story is to write a new one. People in this town have short memories when it comes to their own sins, but they remember kindness. His eyes crinkled at the corners. Danny knew that. It's why he helped them secretly instead of exposing them publicly. He could have destroyed this town with what he knew, but he chose to protect the innocent instead. That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah returned to the hidden office to continue examining Daniel's records. Among the files, she found medical documents that confirmed what the video had suggested. Daniel had anonymously paid for John's cancer treatments at a specialized facility in Denver. Bills that should have bankrupted Sarah had mysteriously been covered by a patient assistance program that didn't actually exist. Daniel had created the fiction to help her without revealing his identity. The revelation brought fresh tears. John had fought so hard, endured brutal treatments that had ultimately failed to save him. But without Daniel's intervention, they wouldn't have had those final precious months together. Her unknown brother had given her that gift, asking nothing in return, not even acknowledgement. A soft knock at the hidden entrance pulled Sarah from her thoughts. Catherine stood in the doorway, hesitation evident in her posture. "Maria, let me in. I hope you don't mind. I thought you might have questions after our conversation earlier." Sarah welcomed her into the secret room, watching as Catherine moved among the evidence boards with the familiarity of someone who had been there before. Her fingers trailed over a photograph of Daniel, lingering on his face with unmistakable tenderness. "He worked down here most nights." Catherine's voice was soft with memory, sometimes until dawn. "I'd bring him coffee, try to convince him to rest." Her smile turned wistful. "He was the most stubborn man I've ever known. Once he committed to a course of action, nothing could dissuade him." "Why did you break up?" Sarah asked, curiosity overcoming politeness. "If you were so close." Catherine moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit grounds. "I wanted a normal relationship. Dinners out, weekends away, introducing him to my family. Daniel refused to be seen with me in public. He said his reputation would tarnish mine, that the enemies he'd made would target anyone he cared about." Her shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "I thought he was being paranoid." Until the threat started. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted their conversation. Headlights swept across the window as a luxury SUV pulled up the driveway. Sarah recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Thomas Reynolds. She'd seen it parked in front of the bank earlier that day. Catherine's face paled. "You should be careful with him. Reynolds is dangerous when cornered." Sarah moved quickly to the hidden entrance, closing it securely behind them before heading upstairs to answer the insistent knocking at the front door. Jack materialized from the shadows of the dining room, his hand resting near his holstered weapon as Sarah opened the door. Thomas Reynolds stood on the porch, impeccably dressed in a camel hair coat that probably cost more than Sarah had made in 3 months of substitute teaching. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced and insincere as he took in her appearance. "Mrs. Connor, or should I say Ms. Sullivan, I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." Reynolds' gaze moved past her to Catherine, recognition and something darker flashing in his eyes. "Ms. Walker, how unexpected to find you here. What do you want, Reynolds?" Jack's voice carried the quiet menace of a man who had faced far more dangerous opponents than a small-town banker. Reynolds maintained his smile, though it no longer reached his eyes. "I heard about the incident at the hardware store today. Small towns, news travels quickly. I wanted to personally welcome you to Lakeside and offer any assistance you might need in settling in." His attention returned to Sarah. "The Sullivan estate is a significant property. If you find the maintenance overwhelming, I'd be happy to take it off your hands." At a very generous price, of course. Sarah felt Catherine stiffen beside her, Jack's warning from earlier echoing in her mind. "This house isn't for sale, Mr. Reynolds. Not at any price. Everyone has a price, Mrs. Connor." Reynolds' voice hardened, the facade of geniality slipping. "Even your brother eventually understood that. Consider my offer carefully. Lakeside can be a difficult place for outsiders, especially those connected to controversial figures." The threat hung in the air between them. Sarah maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. "I appreciate your concern, but we're quite comfortable here. Now, if you'll excuse us, it's getting late." As Reynolds turned to leave, he paused, glancing back with calculated casualness. "By the way, I understand you found some of Daniel's old papers, banking records, correspondence, that sort of thing. As the current director of Lakeside Savings and Loan, I'd be obligated to take possession of any bank-related documents. Confidentiality requirements, you understand." Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I haven't come across anything like that. Just personal effects, family photographs." Reynolds' eyes narrowed slightly, disbelief evident in his expression. If you do find anything, I'm sure you'll do the right thing. Banking records are private property of the institution. The penalty for withholding them could be significant. His gaze drifted meaningfully toward the second floor where Michael and Emma slept. Good night, Mrs. Connor. We'll speak again soon. After he'd gone, Catherine's composure crumbled. She sank onto the nearest chair, hands trembling. He knows. Somehow he knows you found Daniel's evidence. Jack locked the door, checking the windows with military precision. He's fishing. If he had proof, he wouldn't be making thinly veiled threats. He'd have the sheriff here with a search warrant. The next morning brought a new challenge. Sarah received a call from Principal Matthews. Michael had gotten into a fight with another boy who had taunted him about living in the crazy banker's haunted house. Though Michael hadn't thrown the first punch, both boys faced suspension. The principal's voice carried unmistakable satisfaction as she informed Sarah of the decision. By the time Sarah arrived at the school, Michael sat leaning in the office, a fresh ice pack held to his already bruised face. The other boy had been picked up by his father minutes earlier, leaving without consequences, according to the secretary's whispered information. The disparity in treatment was obvious and deliberate. After bringing Michael home, where Maria fussed over him with herbal remedies and Emma appointed herself his official nurse, Sarah focused her energy on the house itself. Physical labor had always been her therapy, and the mansion provided plenty of opportunities for renovation and repair. Jack arrived with a truck full of supplies, lumber, paint, tools, acquired from a hardware store in the next town over. Together they tackled the damaged back door, replacing the lock with a heavy-duty deadbolt and reinforcing the frame. The work was therapeutic, giving Sarah's frustrated energy a productive outlet. By evening, they had secured all the first-floor entry points and started repairs on a leaking section of roof. The physical transformations paralleled Sarah's internal ones. With each repair, the mansion felt more like her home, a fortress she was determined to defend against those who had wronged her brother and now threatened her family. Days settled into a routine. Sarah homeschooled the children temporarily, using her teaching experience to create engaging lessons while protecting them from the town's hostility. Jack became a daily presence, teaching Michael carpentry skills as they worked on restoring the mansion's neglected features. The boy blossomed under the older man's patient instruction, his natural mechanical aptitude finding expression in increasingly complex projects. Emma formed an immediate bond with Maria, following the housekeeper around the kitchen and garden, absorbing Spanish phrases and cooking techniques with the ease of childhood. Together they planted the first seeds in the greenhouse attached to the east wing, preparing for spring despite the winter snow still blanketing the grounds. Catherine visited regularly, bringing historical information about the mansion and town that helped Sarah understand the context of Daniel's investigation. As a retired high school history teacher, Catherine had access to archives and local records that proved invaluable in piecing together the complex web of relationships and transactions at the heart of the corruption. One afternoon, while Sarah was restoring an antique writing desk in the library, Michael came running in, excitement breaking through his usual reserve. "Mom, look what I found in the wall!" He held up a small metal box discovered while helping Jack replace rotted wood paneling in the dining room. The tin container was sealed with rust and age, requiring careful prying to open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, they found a stack of letters bound with faded ribbon. Sarah recognized her mother's handwriting immediately from the birth certificate she'd found earlier. The letters, dated before Sarah's birth, detailed Catherine Sullivan's concerns about Thomas's partnership with Henderson and references to irregularities at the bank that James refuses to discuss. My grandmother knew. Sarah looked up from the letters, meeting Jack's concerned gaze. The corruption at the bank started with my grandfather, and my father was trying to cover it up. Jack's weathered face reflected grim understanding. That's why your father was so eager to ship Danny off to those relatives in New York after the accident. He knew Danny had found something in the bank records, something that implicated James Sullivan in Henderson's schemes. The pieces were coming together, forming a picture more complex and disturbing than Sarah had imagined. Her brother hadn't just stumbled onto recent fraud. He'd uncovered a decades-long conspiracy that reached back to their own family's involvement. No wonder he'd felt such overwhelming responsibility to make things right, even at tremendous personal cost. A week after Sarah's arrival in Lakeside, A formal-looking envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside was a letter requesting her presence at the offices of Davis and Associates, attorneys at law, regarding the matter of Daniel Sullivan's estate. The appointment was set for the following morning. The law office occupied the second floor of Lakeside's oldest commercial building, its interior a study in mahogany and leather that spoke of old money and quiet power. Michael Davis, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and penetrating eyes, welcomed Sarah into a conference room where a younger woman waited with a stack of folders. "Mrs. Connor, I'm Michael Davis, and this is my associate, Dr. Pamela Harris. We represent the estate of your brother, Daniel Sullivan." Davis gestured to a chair at the polished conference table. "There are some questions about the sale of the Sullivan property that we need to clarify." Sarah tensed, preparing for yet another challenge to her ownership. "Is there a problem?" Her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "Well, the sale for $100 was highly irregular." Davis opened a folder, reviewing its contents with practiced precision. "We investigated and discovered that the City Hall employee, Mr. Thompson, received specific instructions from Daniel 2 years ago. He was to wait for a woman named Elizabeth Ann Sullivan, who would appear in a time of need. Is that illegal?" Sarah's fingers curled around the armrests of her chair, knuckles whitening. "Not exactly illegal, but highly unorthodox." Dr. Harris leaned forward, her expression softening. "We also discovered that you are indeed the sister of the late Daniel Sullivan, which completely changes the situation." She exchanged glances with Davis before continuing. "By law, you would already be entitled to the inheritance as Daniel's only living relative. He didn't need to create this elaborate scheme. So what does this mean?" Sarah looked between the two professionals, trying to gauge whether they represented a threat or potential allies. "It means you didn't need to buy the house," Davis explained, his tone matter-of-fact. "It was already yours by right. Besides, there are other properties and investments in Daniel's name that are also part of your inheritance." Sarah struggled to process this new information. "Other properties?" "Yes, Mrs. Connor." Dr. Harris consulted her notes. 3 rental houses in town, a cabin property in the mountains, and investments worth approximately $2 million. $2 million? Sarah's voice emerged as a whisper. That couldn't be right, not after what she discovered about Daniel depleting his fortune to repay bank customers. Davis smiled slightly, the first crack in his professional demeanor. Daniel was much more financially savvy than he appeared. He lived simply but invested wisely. Most of the money comes from investments he made over 20 years ago in tech companies and renewable energy. The returns were substantial. They also found a letter from Daniel to the lawyers explaining the entire situation. He knew about Sarah's legal rights but wanted her to find the house by chance at the right moment in her life. He believed it would be less traumatic than having strangers appear with news of an inheritance from a brother she'd never met. By the time Sarah left the law office, her world had shifted once again. The documents in her briefcase confirmed her ownership of properties worth millions, access to investment accounts, and a checking account with $50,000 for immediate expenses. The financial security that had eluded her since John's death was now assured, a final gift from the brother she'd never known. Returning to the mansion, Sarah found an unexpected visitor waiting in the driveway. A nondescript sedan was parked behind Jack's truck, a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit leaning against its hood. He straightened as she approached, extending a hand in greeting. "Mrs. Connor, Peter Collins, I'm an advisor to Mayor Henderson." The man's handshake was firm, his eyes darting nervously toward the house and back to her face. "I need to speak with you. Privately. It's about your brother and about Thomas Reynolds." Inside, with Jack positioned by the window keeping watch, Collins perched on the edge of a chair in the living room, declining Maria's offer of coffee with a tense smile. Once they were alone, his demeanor changed, shoulders slumping as if under immense pressure. "I worked with Daniel during his final year. Not openly, I couldn't risk being seen with him. But I provided information, helped him track the money." Collins rubbed his hands together, a nervous gesture at odds with his professional appearance. "Your brother was right about everything. Reynolds, Henderson, the development fund embezzlement, it's been going on for decades. Millions siphoned from projects meant to help this community." Sarah studied the man carefully, searching for signs of deception. "Why are you telling me this now? Why come forward? Because they're getting desperate. Collins lowered his voice further, though they were alone in the room. Reynolds has been asking questions about Daniel's records, convinced your brother left evidence that could expose them all. When you showed up, he swallowed hard. There's a meeting tonight. Reynolds, Henderson, Wilson, and the others. They're discussing how to handle the Sullivan problem. You mean me? Sarah's voice remained steady despite the chill that ran through her. Collins nodded grimly. They're afraid you found something in the house. Something Daniel hid before he died. His gaze met hers directly for the first time. Did you? Before Sarah could decide how to answer, the plate glass window behind Collins exploded inward. The impact threw her to the floor as Jack shouted a warning. When she looked up, Collins lay sprawled across the coffee table, blood spreading across his chest from a bullet wound. Jack dragged her behind the shelter of a heavy oak cabinet as a second shot splintered the doorframe. Stay down! His voice carried the sharp command of combat as he drew his weapon and moved to secure the children upstairs. Sarah crawled to Collins, who gasped for breath, blood bubbling at his lips. His fingers clutched weakly at her sleeve, pulling her closer to hear his failing whisper. Find the judge, Holden. Only he knows the code. His eyes fixed on something beyond her, life fading as Sarah pressed futilely against his wound. The knowledge he'd come to share died with him, leaving only cryptic final words in the echo of gunfire in the shattered piece of her newfound home. The harsh glare of emergency lights painted the Sullivan mansion in alternating flashes of red and blue. Sheriff Wilson moved through the living room with deliberate slowness, his deputies photographing the shattered window and Collins's body with clinical detachment. The ambulance had already departed, empty. Nothing to be done for the mayor's advisor except pronounce him dead at the scene. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, Emma clutched tightly against her chest while Michael pressed against her side. The children's faces were pale with shock, their eyes wide with questions no child should have to ask. Jack stood guard by the doorway, his military bearing intact despite the chaos around them, his gaze never leaving Wilson's movements. Random hunting accident. Wilson's voice carried across the room as he approached, notebook flipping closed with practiced finality. Stray bullet from the woods behind your property. Bad luck, really. Happens every season despite posted restrictions. Sarah's fingers curled protectively around Emma's shoulders. A precise shot through my front window that killed a man who was about to provide evidence of corruption? That's not a hunting accident, Sheriff. That's an execution. Wilson's expression hardened, jaw muscles twitching beneath weathered skin. Careful with those accusations, Mrs. Connor. Slander's a serious offense in Lakeside. His hand rested meaningfully on his holstered weapon. We'll need statements from everyone present, starting with the children. Jack stepped forward, his stance shifting subtly to place himself between Wilson and the family. The children didn't witness anything. They were upstairs with Maria when the shooting occurred. His voice was calm but left no room for negotiation, and I believe standard procedure is to take statements at a later time when witnesses aren't in shock, unless you're handling things differently in Lakeside than the rest of the country. The two men locked eyes in silent confrontation until Wilson finally shrugged, backing down with forced casualness. Tomorrow morning then, my office, 9 sharp, all of you. He jerked his head toward his deputies, who began packing their equipment without having collected a single meaningful piece of evidence. After the law enforcement vehicles disappeared down the driveway, the mansion fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by Emma's occasional whimpers. Sarah moved through the motions of normalcy for the children's sake, dinner, baths, bedtime stories, while her mind raced through Collins's final words. Find Judge Holden. The name meant nothing to her, another piece in the increasingly dangerous puzzle her life had become. Once the children were asleep, Sarah found Jack in Daniel's office, methodically cleaning his service weapon with the focused precision of a man preparing for battle. Catherine had arrived shortly after the police left, her face ashen as she helped Maria board up the shattered window. We need to leave, Jack. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Take the children somewhere safe until this is over. They just killed a man in my living room. Jack's hands never paused in their practiced movements. And go where? This doesn't end with you running, Sarah. Reynolds and his crew won't stop until they're certain Daniel's evidence is destroyed. His eyes met hers, sharp with unwavering certainty. You leave now, you'll never stop running. Catherine appeared behind Sarah, her usual elegance replaced by grim determination. Jack's right. I've spent 2 years watching this town operate like nothing happened after Daniel died. Collins was the first person with inside access to come forward. His death won't be the last if we don't finish what Daniel started. Sarah sank into a chair, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Find Judge Holden, Catherine. Collins said only he knows the code. Catherine's expression shifted, recognition dawning in her eyes. Robert Holden. He presided over the case against Daniel when the bank collapsed. Retired 3 years ago, lives out by Silver Lake, keeps to himself these days. The town treats him like a pariah since he publicly questioned some of the evidence against Daniel during the final hearing. By dawn, they had formulated a plan. Jack would take the children to his cabin deep in the mountains, a defensible location known only to him. Maria would accompany them, providing a sense of continuity and comfort for Michael and Emma. Catherine would return to her home as if nothing had happened, maintaining appearances while quietly gathering additional information from her contacts in town. Sarah would seek out Judge Holden, following the only lead Collins had provided with his dying breath. The morning brought heavy snow, thick flakes swirling from a leaden sky as Sarah hugged her children goodbye. Michael's face was solemn beyond his years, understanding far more than Sarah wished he could. Emma clung to her, small fingers grasping Sarah's coat with desperate strength. We're just going camping with Uncle Jack for a few days. Sarah forced brightness into her voice that never reached her eyes. You'll have so much fun, and I'll come get you very soon. Jack loaded the final supplies into his truck, his movements efficient despite the bandaged shoulder where flying glass had cut him during the shooting. His expression softened only when addressing the children, transforming from hardened veteran to patient grandfather figure. Emma, I've got a special job for you at the cabin. My bird feeders need filling, and you've got the gentlest hands for the job. Think you can handle that responsibility? The little girl nodded solemnly, momentarily distracted from the separation anxiety that had plagued her since John's death. Sarah mouthed a silent thank you to Jack as she helped Emma into the truck's back seat, settling her with a favorite stuffed animal and promises of quick return. Michael lingered, his young face creased with worry far beyond his years. Mom, what if the bad people come back while we're gone? His voice dropped to a whisper. What if they hurt you like they hurt that man? Sarah knelt before him, snow soaking through her jeans as she looked directly into her son's eyes. Some people are afraid of the truth, Michael, but the truth is like water. It always finds a way through, no matter how many barriers try to contain it. She pressed her forehead against his. Your Uncle Daniel understood that. It's why he fought so hard, and it's why we need to finish what he started. The boy nodded, a flicker of his father's determination crossing his features before he climbed into the truck beside his sister. Sarah watched until the vehicle disappeared around the bend in the driveway, swallowed by the curtain of falling snow that transformed the landscape into a blank canvas, erasing tracks and obscuring paths forward. Catherine's car waited at the end of the drive, engine running and heater blasting against the biting cold. They drove in silence through the deserted streets of Lakeside, the early hour and weather keeping most residents indoors. On the outskirts of town, they turned onto a narrow road that wound through dense pine forest towards Silver Lake, the pavement gradually giving way to gravel, then packed dirt, barely visible beneath the accumulating snow. Judge Holden's house perched on a rocky outcropping overlooking the frozen expanse of the lake, its modernist angles a stark contrast to the surrounding wilderness. No other buildings were visible, only endless forests stretching to the distant mountains. The perfect location for a man who wanted to leave society behind. Catherine remained in the car, engine running. He won't talk if I'm with you. Our history is complicated. Daniel's case created rifts that never healed. She handed Sarah a small package wrapped in waterproof material. Daniel gave me this years ago, said if anything happened to him, I should make sure the right person got it. I think that person is you. The path to Holden's door hadn't been cleared recently, snow reaching halfway up Sarah's calves as she trudged towards the imposing structure of glass and weathered cedar. No doorbell adorned the entrance, only a simple bronze knocker shaped like the scales of justice. Holden's small joke or pointed reminder of his former position. Long moments passed after Sarah's knock before the door swung open to reveal a tall man in his 70s, white hair cropped short above a face mapped with deep lines of experience. His eyes, sharp despite his age, assessed Sarah with immediate recognition. Elizabeth Ann Sullivan. Holden's voice carried the practiced authority of decades on the bench. I've been waiting for you to find your way here, though I'd hoped for less dire circumstances. He stepped aside, gesturing her into the warmth beyond without further questions. The interior was surprisingly cozy, bookshelves lining every wall, a fire crackling in a riverstone hearth, comfortable furniture arranged to take advantage of the panoramic view of the lake below. It spoke of a man who valued knowledge, comfort, and natural beauty above the trappings of status his former position might have afforded. Collins is dead. Sarah removed her snow-covered boots by the door, accepting the offered cup of coffee with grateful hands. Shot through my front window while telling me about the corruption. His last words were about you. Said you know some code. Holden's expression didn't change, though something flickered behind his eyes. Resignation rather than surprise. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this. He moved to a painting on the far wall, a striking landscape of the lake in summer, and swung it aside to reveal a small wall safe. His fingers moved deliberately across the keypad. Daniel and I arranged a contingency plan. If anything happened to him before he could complete his investigation, certain protocols would activate. The safe door swung open, revealing a single USB drive labeled with Daniel's initials. Holden handed it to Sarah, his movements careful, deliberate. This contains everything your brother collected on Reynolds, Henderson, and their operation. Financial records, recorded conversations, documentation of bribes and threats, enough to bring down their entire network. Why didn't you come forward with this after Daniel died? Sarah cradled the small device that had cost at least 2 lives already. Holden settled into a leather armchair, suddenly looking every one of his years. The evidence wasn't complete. Daniel needed one final piece to connect Henderson directly to the embezzlement of federal development funds. Without it, the case might have fallen apart, leaving the real criminals untouched. He sipped his coffee, eyes distant with memory. And then there was the matter of the threats. What threats? Sarah leaned forward, sensing they had reached the heart of the mystery that had claimed her brother. They threatened you, Elizabeth. Holden's gaze returned to her face, sharp with remembered anger. Henderson's people discovered Daniel was looking for you. They made it clear that if he pursued the case against them, you would suffer the consequences. Even without knowing you, your brother chose to protect you over exposing them. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Daniel had sacrificed his reputation, allowed himself to be vilified by the entire town, rather than risk harm coming to the sister he had never even met. The depth of that love, so profound it extended to a virtual stranger connected only by blood, left her breathless. Holden continued, unfolding the final pieces of the story. Daniel accelerated his plans after his cancer diagnosis. He knew his time was limited, so he focused on securing evidence and creating fail-safes. The property transfer, the trust funds, the hidden room, all designed to protect both you and the truth until the right moment. But why wait? Why not give this to the FBI or state authorities? Sarah held up the USB drive, its small form belying the explosive contents within. Holden's laugh held no humor. Who do you think Henderson's golf partners are? The regional FBI director? The state attorney general? This corruption runs deeper than Lakeside, with tendrils reaching to Denver and beyond. His expression hardened. Daniel needed someone he could trust implicitly, someone with personal motivation to see justice done, someone they wouldn't suspect until it was too late. He needed you. The judge rose with the careful movements of aging joints, retrieving a folder from his desk. This contains names, contact information for journalists at national papers, federal prosecutors Daniel vetted personally for integrity, people beyond Henderson's influence. The files on that drive are encrypted. The password is your birthday followed by your mother's maiden name. As Sarah prepared to leave, Holden gripped her arm with surprising strength. Trust no one in Lakeside except those who've already proven loyal. His eyes bored into hers with urgent intensity. And Sarah, if they discover you have this evidence, they'll stop at nothing to retrieve it. Your children would become their most effective leverage. The drive back to Lakeside passed in tense silence. Catherine navigating the increasingly treacherous roads as the snowstorm intensified. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, weighing risks against the responsibility she now carried. The USB drive felt impossibly heavy in her pocket, the culmination of her brother's life's work, his final legacy. When they reached Catherine's house, a modest Victorian on a quiet street, Sarah made her decision. I need your laptop, something not connected to your home network, and I need you to take me to the cabin afterward. I can't go back to the mansion. It's the first place they'll look. Catherine led her to a small home office, producing an older laptop from a desk drawer. I keep this as a backup, rarely use it. Will that work? Her fingers trembled slightly as she plugged in the power cord, the weight of their actions settling around them like the snow accumulating outside the windows. Sarah inserted the USB drive, entering the password Holden had provided. The screen filled with folders, hundreds of files meticulously organized by date, subject, and individual names. Daniel's methodical mind, evident in every labeled document and cross-reference. She opened the folder labeled Henderson Federal Funds and began scanning documents, her teacher's trained eye quickly absorbing and connecting information. What emerged was staggering: a systematic looting of federal development grants intended for low-income housing, infrastructure improvements, and environmental remediation. Millions diverted through shell companies, phantom contractors, and inflated invoices, all flowing eventually back to accounts controlled by Henderson and his inner circle. Most damning were the recorded conversations: Reynolds discussing kickbacks with contractors, Henderson threatening business owners who asked questions, Sheriff Wilson agreeing to bury evidence in exchange for a vacation property in the mountains. The corruption touched every level of Lakeside's power structure. Sarah worked methodically, copying key files to a separate thumb drive Catherine provided, organizing the most crucial evidence for quick access. It took hours to process even a fraction of Daniel's exhaustive documentation, but a clear picture emerged, enough to understand why Collins had been silenced so permanently. By late afternoon, as darkness descended early under heavy snow clouds, Sarah had compiled what she needed. She placed the original USB drive in an envelope with a letter she'd composed, addressing it to the most prominent name on Holden's list, an investigative reporter at the Washington Post known for exposing government corruption. Catherine would mail it from Denver, far from Lakeside's watching eyes. They were preparing to leave for the cabin when Catherine's phone rang. The older woman answered, her expression shifting from curiosity to alarm as she listened. "Jack, it's Catherine. What's happened?" Her eyes locked with Sarah's, filling with dread as Jack's voice came through clearly enough for both to hear. "They took Michael, Sarah, from right outside the cabin. A man in a sheriff's uniform said you'd been in an accident, needed him at the hospital. He went with them before I could stop him. Emma's safe with Maria, but they've got your boy." The world narrowed to a pinpoint of pure, cold rage. Sarah gripped the edge of Catherine's desk, knuckles whitening as she fought for control. Where? Where would they take him? The old mill by the river, most likely. Jack's voice carried the controlled fury of a professional assessing tactical options. "Reynolds owns it through a shell company. Isolated, soundproof, no witnesses. I'm on my way there now." "No," Sarah's command cracked through the speaker. "They're using him as bait, Jack. They'll be expecting you." Her mind raced, assessing options with clarity born of desperate circumstances. "Meet me at the east end of River Road in 20 minutes. Bring your truck and whatever weapons you have. And Jack, call the number Holden gave us. Tell them exactly what's happening." The abandoned textile mill loomed against the twilight sky like a decaying giant, broken windows gaping like missing teeth in its brick facade. The lakeside river churned below, swollen with snowmelt, its rushing waters masking any sounds from within the crumbling structure. A black SUV and a sheriff's cruiser sat in what remained of the parking lot, their presence confirming Jack's suspicion. Sarah studied the building through binoculars from their vantage point in the tree line, Jack beside her checking the magazine of his sidearm with practiced efficiency. The knowledge that Michael was somewhere inside that hulking ruin, frightened and alone among people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill, crystallized her resolve into something diamond-hard and unbreakable. "They'll have him on the second floor in the old manager's office." Jack indicated a window where faint light leaked through boarded openings. Best sight lines, single entry point, easy to defend. His tactical assessment continued, professional and detached despite the personal stakes. Two men at the main entrance, probably armed. Unknown number inside with the boy. Sarah absorbed the information, her mind overlaying the building's layout with the contents of Daniel's files. There's another way in. The basement level has access through the old water intake system. Reynolds' company filed renovation plans last year. I saw them in Daniel's records. They replaced the grates with maintenance doors. Her eyes never left the building where her son was being held. We can enter through the riverside, come up through the interior. Jack's weathered face registered surprise, followed quickly by respect. You'd make a damn fine soldier, Sarah Connor. Then he unzipped his duffel bag, revealing equipment that spoke to preparation far beyond casual hunting. Night vision goggles, tactical vests, communication earpieces. Always be ready for the worst while praying for the best. Your brother taught me that. They moved through the snow-covered terrain with careful precision, using the storm's cover to approach the riverside of the mill unseen. The maintenance door was padlocked, but yielded quickly to the bolt cutters Jack produced from his seemingly endless supply of equipment. The passage beyond was dark and damp, the sound of the river echoing through ancient brick tunnels that smelled of mildew and forgotten industry. Their progress was slow, methodical, each step placed with deliberate care to avoid alerting those above. Jack led the way, his military training evident in every measured movement. Sarah followed, her mother's heart racing, while her mind remained coldly focused on the task ahead. The weight of Daniel's backup USB drive pressed against her chest, where she'd secured it inside her clothing. A reminder of everything at stake. The basement level opened into a cavernous space filled with rusted machinery and decades of accumulated debris. Weak light filtered through grates in the ceiling, the floor of the main production area above. Voices drifted down, too indistinct for words, but clear enough to identify locations. Jack pointed upward, then to a metal staircase barely visible in the gloom. Second floor, northwest corner. They ascended silently, emerging into what had once been the mill's main floor. Massive looms stood like prehistoric skeletons in the dim light, covered in dust and bird droppings. Jack gestured for Sarah to wait as he moved ahead, checking sight lines and potential threats with practiced efficiency. The voices grew clearer, Reynolds' cultured tones distinguishable even at a distance, another voice responding with the lazy drawl of Sheriff Wilson. And then Sarah heard it, Michael's voice, high and frightened but defiant even in terror. "I want my mom! You can't keep me here!" The sound pierced her like a physical pain, maternal instinct nearly overwhelming tactical sense. Jack's hand on her arm prevented the headlong rush that might have doomed them both. "One chance, Sarah." His whisper barely stirred the air between them. "We do this right or we don't get another try. There are at least 3 of them up there with Michael. They're expecting you to come through the front, probably alone and unarmed. We need to change those odds." The second floor was accessible via a metal catwalk that ringed the main production floor. Jack pointed to 2 different access points, indicating they should separate to approach from different angles. The earpieces would allow coordination without visual contact. Sarah nodded her understanding, accepting the small canister he pressed into her hand. Flashbang. Count to 3 after pulling the pin, then toss it in and cover your ears. Wait for my signal. Sarah moved into position, her heart thundering in her chest, yet her hands steady as she prepared to fight for her son. Through a gap in the partially open door, she could see Michael seated in a chair, tear tracks staining his dirt-smudged face. Reynolds paced before him, checking his watch with obvious impatience. Sheriff Wilson leaned against the wall, the casual set of his shoulders betraying no concern about having kidnapped a child. A third man, one of Wilson's deputies, stood guard by the window, rifle resting across his arms. Jack's voice whispered through the earpiece, "Ready on my mark. 3, 2, 1. The world exploded into chaos. Jack's flashbang detonated in the hallway outside the office, drawing the deputy and Wilson toward the door with weapons raised. Sarah pulled the pin on her own device and tossed it through the doorway, ducking back as brilliant light and concussive sound filled the space beyond. She moved in the moment after detonation, finding Reynolds and the others disoriented and half blind from the tactical devices. "Michael!" Sarah lunged for her son, placing herself between the boy and the armed men struggling to regain their bearings. Jack burst through the second entrance, his weapon trained on Wilson with unwavering precision. "Gun on the floor, Sheriff. Now!" His voice carried the absolute authority of combat command. "Deputy, same instruction. Slow and careful." Wilson blinked rapidly, shaking his head to clear the effects of the flashbang. His hand moved toward his holstered weapon, despite Jack's warning. Sarah shielded Michael with her body, preparing for the worst. When the room suddenly filled with new voices, new weapons, new authority. "FBI! On the ground now!" Agents in tactical gear poured through both entrances, weapons trained on Wilson and his deputy, who finally raised their hands in surrender. Reynolds stood frozen, his perfect composure finally shattered by the reality of federal agents securing the scene with practiced efficiency. Sarah clutched Michael to her chest, his small body trembling against hers as the chaos unfolded around them. A female agent approached, her expression professional but kind, as she crouched beside them. "Mrs. Connor, I'm Special Agent Diana Rivera. We received information about this situation from a Judge Holden." She glanced at Jack, who had been allowed to keep his weapon after showing identification. "And from your friend, Mr. Thompson. Let's get you and your son somewhere safe." Outside, more federal vehicles had arrived, lights painting the falling snow in blue and red strobes. Agent Rivera guided Sarah and Michael toward an SUV with tinted windows, its heater already running against the bitter cold. Inside, she handed Sarah a satellite phone. "There's someone who wants to speak with you." The voice on the line was unfamiliar, but carried unmistakable authority. "Mrs. Connor, this is Assistant Director Marcus Chen, FBI Denver Field Office. We've been investigating the Lakeside situation for some time based on fragments of information, but lacks sufficient evidence for direct action. Judge Holden's call today, combined with materials he provided from your brother's investigation, changed that equation. We're moving on multiple targets simultaneously across the county." Relief washed through Sarah in dizzying waves as she held Michael close, his small body gradually relaxing as the immediate danger passed. Jack appeared at the vehicle's window, conferring briefly with Agent Rivera before joining them inside. "They're rolling up Henderson and the rest of the network now." He accepted a bottle of water from the agent, exhaustion finally showing through his professional demeanor. "Your brother would be proud, Sarah." He finished what Daniel started. The following days passed in a whirlwind of federal interviews, evidence processing, and reunions. Emma and Maria returned from the cabin, the little girl flinging herself into Sarah's arms with sobbing relief, while Michael recounted his rescue to an awestruck sister, his trauma already transforming into an adventure story in the resilience of childhood. The Sullivan Mansion became command central for the federal investigation, agents moving respectfully through the spaces Daniel had once occupied, cataloging and cross-referencing the mountain of evidence Sarah provided from the hidden office. The basement room that had served as Daniel's secret headquarters became the hub of activity, his meticulous work finally serving its intended purpose. On the third day, Agent Rivera arrived with news that transformed the atmosphere from focused determination to celebration. Henderson, Reynolds, Wilson, and 12 others had been indicted by a federal grand jury on charges ranging from embezzlement of federal funds to kidnapping, attempted murder, and corruption of public officials. The FBI had frozen assets, seized properties, and uncovered offshore accounts holding millions in stolen funds. That evening, as federal agents packed the last of their equipment and prepared to transfer operations to Denver, Sarah stood on the mansion's porch watching the sunset paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. Jack joined her, offering a mug of coffee as they contemplated the transformation of their world in just 2 short weeks. "I've found something today I think you should see." Jack produced a thumb drive from his pocket, different from the ones containing Daniel's evidence. Security camera footage from the bank, dated the week before Daniel died. He'd had a technical friend clean up the quality. "Thought you might want it." Inside, when the children were occupied with a movie Maria had selected, Sarah connected the drive to her laptop. The footage showed Daniel in his office at the bank, thin from illness, but his eyes still sharp with intelligence. The timestamp indicated late evening, the building otherwise empty. The camera captured him retrieving something from his safe, a small box that he handled with obvious care. The next clip showed Daniel entering the Sullivan Mansion, still carrying the box. Jack had enhanced this footage as well, zooming in as Daniel placed the item inside a wall panel in what Sarah now recognized as the library. The renovation plans I found. They weren't filed by Reynolds. Jack's voice was soft with revelation. Daniel had contractors modify parts of the house before he died, created hiding places even Reynolds wouldn't know to look for. Sarah moved with purpose toward the library, Jack following close behind. The wood paneling looked uniform to casual observation, but with Jack's guidance, Sarah located the section from the video. A gentle pressure in precisely the right spot revealed a small compartment hidden within the wall, and inside the box from the security footage. The ornate wooden container fit perfectly in Sarah's palms, its surface polished by generations of handling. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay a man's signet ring bearing the Sullivan family crest. Beside it, a folded note in Daniel's distinctive handwriting. For Michael. A legacy worth more than money. Integrity above all. A week later, Lakeside held a town meeting unlike any in its history. The high school gymnasium overflowed with residents seeking answers, demanding accountability, struggling to process the complete upheaval of their community's power structure. Federal receivers had taken control of town finances, interim officials appointed to replace those arrested or under investigation. Sarah sat in the front row, Michael and Emma beside her, as Judge Holden, called out of retirement to help restore order, addressed the shocked community. The truth about Daniel Sullivan unfolded before people who had vilified him for years, his reputation restored too late for him to witness. When Holden asked Sarah to speak, she approached the microphone with the quiet dignity that had carried her through the darkest days. My brother was not a perfect man. His voice carried through the silent gymnasium. Daniel made mistakes, held grudges too long, kept secrets that might have been better shared. But he believed in justice with uncompromising conviction. And he loved this town enough to sacrifice everything, his reputation, his fortune, ultimately his life, to protect its people from those who would exploit them. Her gaze swept across faces now sheepish with shame or wet with belated tears of understanding. The same people who had shunned her family weeks earlier now hung on her every word. I didn't know my brother in life. That opportunity was stolen from both of us. But in death, he gave me an incredible gift. Not just this house or financial security, but purpose. A chance to know him through his work, his principles, his unwavering commitment to what was right regardless of personal cost. She paused, emotion finally breaking through her composed exterior. That's a legacy worth more than money or property. It's the true inheritance he left me, left my children, and ultimately left to Lakeside. The question now is, what will build with it? The applause began slowly, scattered at first, then swelling to fill the cavernous space. Not universal, some wounds were too fresh, some complicity too deep for immediate healing, but enough to signal the beginning of Lakeside's long journey toward recovery. After the meeting, townsfolk approached hesitantly at first, then with increasing openness. Clara Harrison, who had been among the most hostile, tearfully revealed how Daniel had anonymously paid her son's college tuition after the bank closure cost her husband his construction business. Others shared similar stories. Medical bills covered, mortgages saved, small businesses kept afloat through anonymous donations now traceable to Daniel Sullivan. Bill Bell from the hardware store shouldered through the crowd, his earlier hostility replaced with gruff contrition. Mrs. Connor, I owe you and your brother an apology. My shop's open to you anytime. Whatever supplies you need for the mansion, at cost. His weathered hand extended in a peace offering that represented more than commerce, the beginning of community healing. 2 days later, while Sarah supervised repairs to the mansion's bullet-damaged living room, a sleek sedan with rental plates pulled into the driveway. The woman who emerged moved with purpose despite her obvious exhaustion, mid-30s, professional attire, the sharp gaze of someone who missed nothing. Mrs. Connor, Amanda Bennett, I'm a private investigator. I was hired by your brother 2 years ago for a very specific job. Her handshake was firm, her manner direct without being abrupt. May I come in? I believe you'll find what I have to share worth your time. Over coffee served by Maria, whose position as housekeeper had evolved into something closer to family member, Bennett outlined her assignment. Daniel had tasked her with locating any remaining Sullivan relatives scattered across the country, a final piece of his grand plan to restore what had been lost. I found 3 people with documented connections to the Sullivan family tree. Bennett opened a laptop displaying photographs and documents with professional precision. A second cousin in Chicago, a great aunt in Miami, and this is the most interesting part, a first cousin, daughter of your father's brother. She was adopted as a baby and never knew about her biological family. Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips, a new possibility blooming in her mind. Where is she? Nearby, actually. Boulder. Her name is Sophia Sullivan Johnson. She's a pediatrician and has 2 daughters. Bennett's professional demeanor softened slightly. Your brother knew about her, asked me to wait until you were settled in the house before making contact. He wanted you to have time to process everything before meeting more relatives. Does she know about us? Sarah's voice barely above a whisper, hope and apprehension battling within her. Not yet. Daniel left specific instructions for me to only approach her after you gave permission. Bennett produced a sealed envelope from her briefcase. He left a letter for her too, explaining everything. Similar to what he prepared for you, I imagine. That evening, Sarah sat with Catherine and Jack in the library, the space that had once been Daniel's sanctuary now becoming her own. The question of contacting Sophia hung between them, a decision only Sarah could make, but one that would affect all their lives. Daniel wanted this. Catherine's voice carried the weight of someone who had known him best. Family meant everything to him. It's why he spent his life searching for you, why he created all these contingency plans. Finding Sophia completes the circle he started. Jack nodded his agreement, his usual stoicism softened by evident affection for the family he'd come to protect. Some battles end, Sarah. Others transform into something different, something worth building instead of fighting. His weathered hand indicated the mansion around them, the family they'd forged through crisis. Daniel gave you back your past. What you do with that gift shapes your future. Sarah's fingers traced the edges of Daniel's letter to Sophia, identical to the one that had changed her own life weeks earlier. The mansion no longer felt haunted by mystery or danger. Instead, it hummed with possibility, with connections reestablished and new ones waiting to be formed. In reclaiming her brother's legacy, she had found not only answers about her past, but a foundation for her future. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't hidden in secret rooms or buried in forgotten places, but in the connections that survive time, distance, and even death. Sarah reached for her phone. Decision made. It was time to expand their circle once more, to complete the family Daniel had fought so hard to reunite.